Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Kiwi Talks. I'm honoured to be speaking to the man in front of me. He is an immigration advisor, entrepreneur, businessman. He's actually a jack of all trades, really. Arun Jacob, how you doing?
Very well, Race. Thanks for having me here today.
No worries. I'm always interested in getting more knowledge in my life, in my brain. So tell me how you decided to become an immigration advisor.
It's an interesting story, actually. I call myself the reluctant immigration advisor. I had nothing to do with immigration, to be honest.
Right.
And I come from a background of working in the office automation industry. I worked for a long time with Xerox and Canon and those kinds of companies. I also worked with a very, very large telecommunications firm back in India. And when I went overseas for the first time in 1999 to the US, is when I realized what a big world was outside my little well called India. So that's when my eyes kind of opened up to the fact that there is a much wider stage for people to play on. And then one thing led to another. After the US, I went and worked in the UK for a bit. And then I came to New Zealand in 2001. I call it 2001 BC because that was before children.
Nice.
So it was just me and my wife who came here, and I absolutely fell in love with New Zealand from day one. So it wasn't like the first time that I went overseas. Like I told you, I'd already been to US and UK, worked there, lived there. But there was something very fascinating about New Zealand when I came here. I just felt like I belonged. It was almost a very spiritual sort of experience. And back in the early 2000s, people from India, when they were thinking of migrating, they could only look at the US and UK. And I would look all around me at this beautiful country that I got myself into and say, why aren't those jokers back in India looking at other new destinations like New Zealand? And those days, our migration policy was not very aggressive. We were kind of more in the pull mode rather than the push mode as a nation here in New Zealand. So I said, okay, here's an opportunity to promote this fantastic destination to good, high quality people back home in India. And so it was, I think it's a combination of my love for New Zealand and to make it a better country by attracting the best talent, plus the inherent salesman in me of realizing there's a great destination that can be projected to the right people as well. And that's how my whole tryst with immigration started.
Right. So because you've been to the UK, you've been to America. So what was it specifically about New Zealand?
I think what I liked was the spaces, the wide open spaces to begin with. And I also liked the bicultural platform on which our country has been built. I felt there was an ease in the way people were living. You just felt it in your bones that they were a bit more relaxed and chilled out, and it just suited me very well because I might come across as the aggressive entrepreneur, but deep inside I'm the guy who would rather smell the roses and enjoy a cup of coffee, and take my time to take it all in. And I think we in New Zealand have understood that pace of life. That's not always the rat race, and I think that we found the right work-life balance.
Because, say, in places like India and China, it can be quite cutthroat, right? Because obviously you've got a lot of people there all competing for the same jobs.
Very.
Yeah. So was it easy for you to transition when you first came here?
I'd say yes. I think so. I think that was probably... So there were a lot of invisible things that were, affecting me in a positive way when I moved to New Zealand. And one of them could be that sheer space around you of knowing that there aren't 200,000 people applying for that one single job,
Good point.
Sort of thing, So, and like you said, you used the word cutthroat. Yeah, absolutely. Extraordinarily aggressive environments back in India. You're kind of fighting your way ahead for pretty much everything, including standing in line to get a bottle of milk, sort of thing. So, yeah, I think, I just felt a massive sense of ease. And I just felt a massive sense of that this is the place I belong. And that's where it all started for me.
So when did you decide to found AJV?
Great. So when I came here, another interesting story how I ended up in Hamilton is that, so I was like most migrants of the day. I was in Auckland as well.
Of
course, yeah. And we were there, and we realized my wife was pregnant. and she had the most terrible morning sickness any lady could ever endure. And there was something in the house we were staying. We were actually staying with a family known to us that just wouldn't agree with her and would step in and she'd start throwing up. So it reached a point where she actually got hospitalized for a few days, and we had to leave that home and find another place to go to. And fortunately, I had a friend here in Hamilton, so I called him up and said, "Hi, look, we're looking at a place to stay for a few days. Is it all right if we come to your place?" So he said yes, and that friend also kindly then put me in touch with somebody who was looking for a marketing manager, and that's how I found my first job here in Hamilton. And then, of course, a few months later, our first child was born in Hamilton, and so we formed that emotional connect with Hamilton as well. And that's how we ended up here in Hamilton. Yes.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are some of the common questions that you get asked in regards from people wanting to migrate here?
I think some of the common questions about, are you talking about just in New Zealand in particular, or generally about migration?
Well, both really.
Okay.
Why don't we start with New Zealand and then from a global scale as well?
Yeah, well, I think there is still a little bit of unknown factor around New Zealand. I think to a lot of people from around the world who want to migrate to New Zealand, we are still a bit of an unknown quantity, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Good in the sense, that we continue to live in paradise. We're not getting, beaten down at the borders and, hordes of people wanting to rush in. And I think we also have a fantastic immigration program devised by the government. I think it's very effective. It might have its flaws, but I think overall it's a very, very good program. So the most common questions people ask about New Zealand is are there jobs in New Zealand? Isn't it really small? Because we are stuck next to this big, massive continent/country called Australia. They think that we're just a very tiny little piece of land stuck in the South Pacific, without realizing we're as big as England, UK, or Japan, or the state of California.
Yeah.
Geographically, we're as big as that. So I think there's still a lot of, I'd say, lack of understanding about New Zealand. So sometimes, questions can also be quite silly, like, so do you have an earthquake every day, sort of.
Really?
Some of them can be a bit silly. But I think with the advent of the internet, because remember, I'm talking about the times when I started, which was 2001 till now, I think there's also been a very, very rapid increase in the way the internet has penetrated, and there's more information out there. And because of which I think there's a bit more understanding about us in New Zealand. But yeah, by and large, the bigger questions is, will I be able to find a job? What is the living expenses? Is there racism in New Zealand? Will I be accepted? All the normal, I call them the cliched set of questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So was there, because you started in about 2001, that's around about the time Lord of the Rings became big and put New Zealand on the international stage.
Yeah, that's right.
Did that, in terms of the landscapes, for example, did that shape a lot of the interest in New Zealand all of a sudden, or was it still similar to before in terms of just the general overview of the country in terms of work, livelihood, or did it become a bit more about landscapes and how green it is? Because you know how that's the kind of marketing ploy that New Zealand tourism does now, and it's largely like, say, in America, they think of New Zealand as Lord of the Rings, right? Is there a particular thing that, say, Indians or Chinese, they think of when they think of New Zealand?
I think so. I think Lord of the Rings was quite an important, significant part of the way our migration shaped up later, post-release of the movie. And I think people kind of began to realize that here's this beautiful piece of land. And I think, the first thing that did strike them was the landscapes and the beauty of the country and those sorts of things. Interestingly enough, around the same time, there was also a movie made here in New Zealand, but it was a Bollywood movie from India. It was called Kahona Pyar Hai.
Was that shot in the Coromandel?
No, it was actually shot in the South Island mostly. And there's some beautiful shots of Lake Tekapo and or Queenstown and those kinds of places. That had a massive effect on the Indian market, for instance. I can't speak for Chinese markets, but in India, that movie really established New Zealand as a destination, to the extent that the lead actor of that movie was personally invited for a one-on-one meeting with Helen Clark when she was Prime Minister, and she was on state visit to India, and she presented them with a taonga from New Zealand, and that's the way it happened. So I'd say, I think audiovisual medium has been a massive game changer for us as a destination, both from tourism and migration and international education, and in whichever form migrants were coming to New Zealand.
So what's, say, the difference between migrating to New Zealand or the UK or America, for example? Like, what are the main differences? How much more difficult is it? I mean, I suppose it changes all the time, right? Because it's a difficult one to answer. But is there significantly more of a problem to migrate to some of those other places than New Zealand?
By and large, the underlying principle of migration is the same race, whether it's New Zealand or UK or America or, whichever country you're looking at. And the underlying principle, and I think which a lot of people do not, fathom or understand, is that it's not just a one-way street where migrants are wanting to come into a particular country. It's actually a two-way street. Every country actually has got resource crunch. Every country has got something called a skills shortage. So it is actually a two-way street. And that's something that I say out loud and clear to my clients, telling them, hey, look, you're actually betting on the front foot and not on the back foot. It's not just your desire to be in a particular country, but it's also that country's desire to attract you into their particular domain. I personally feel that I'm actually an unpaid salesperson for the government of New Zealand.
Well, maybe they should pay you.
Yeah, maybe they should. Because I am competing for that talent in the face of competition from UK, Canada, US, Australia, what have you. So there is a massive skills shortage around the world. And again, without getting too deep into the migration subject, if you understand, largely because most of the populations in these countries are coming down or they're aging. In New Zealand, for instance, we have an interesting statistic where most of our population is in the really young age or in the really old age, and that chunk right in the middle, which is where your workforce is, which is getting out there doing work like yourself, earning money and paying taxes, has diminished. How do we fill that to keep our economy going? You have to import that workforce. So it is a two-way street. So when you look at it that way, pretty much all countries have a similar sort of requirement and a pull and push factor. But the skills shortage might differ from country to country. For instance, America might be needing more engineers. UK might be needing more doctors. New Zealand may be requiring more information technology professionals, that sort of thing. So the processes are pretty similar to each country. Again, they're not, very, very different. So I'd say for a migrant, it's important to check to see where their skills will be most valued. And I think, and also otherwise, as OECD nations, most of them also have similar standards of life as well. So it's not such a big decision, really.
Yeah, but so when a migrant contacts you, do they have an idea of what country they want to go to in mind, or do you kind of help them with that?
So there are two kinds of migrants. There is the one who is well researched, done their research, and are very clear because, we are now a multi-destination organization as a company. Earlier, of course, we started, we used to promote only New Zealand, but now we promote Canada, Australia, and a few other English-speaking countries as well. Some of them come very well researched and are very clear in their thoughts and say, hey, look, I want to go only to Australia. And I'm quite clearly wanting to go only as an entrepreneur. So they not only know the destination, but are also very clear about the pathway they want to take. But then there are some who just come and say, you know what, just send me to a good country, sort of thing. And with them, it actually becomes a bit more difficult because we are now trying to match their skills to a destination country.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there any unrealistic expectations some migrants have, though, when they want to move here?
Some of them, I think the unrealistic expectations is a lack of understanding of their own abilities sometimes. Some of them, unfortunately, can't speak very good English. And, that in itself is a big barrier to be successful in a country where the majority of the population would speak in English, of course, or they transact their business, everyday life in English. So some of them do come with unrealistic expectations about their own abilities. Some of them tend to think that if I have money, every problem can be solved.
Definitely not true.
Yeah, definitely not true. Yeah, you're right about that, Reese. And but the other unrealistic expectations, I think some of them walk in and expect to find a job in the first 1 week. They haven't acclimatized to the new environment. They haven't done anything. So some of the unrealistic expectations are around mostly the jobs. How come I didn't find a job in the first week or the first month, sort of thing. While it takes even the average Kiwi graduate youngster from out of college would probably also take a few months to actually get out there and find a job that really matches their skills.
Yeah, because there'd be a number of people that migrate here that might have to, say, a particular company might sponsor them.
Yeah.
But that's not actually the field they want to work in.
Yeah.
That's kind of a stepping stone.
Yeah.
Are they aware of this?
Yes, they are aware of it. And like I said, they are sometimes, trying to cut corners, unfortunately. So whilst they might have been trained all their life as an engineer, and they really should be taking a bit more time to get into the engineering kind of a role, because that is where their real skill is, and that's what New Zealand needs as a skill from them. But if, let's say, somebody, like you said, somebody offers them a job as a manager of a small retail store somewhere, they quickly jump into it because thinking, oh, that job is now going to help me to get my residency faster. So they do tend to take those shortcuts sometimes, but it can come back to bite them sometimes.
Yeah, because this is a problem the world over, particularly in Western countries, where an immigrant comes over and then they're exploited while they're here because what they're sold is not exactly the reality. I always say if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would be your advice to people that might be in that position right now?
I think one of the most important factors that most migrants do not consider is the kind of advisor they're going to. And it's like let's say I've had a problem with the law and I need to find a lawyer. Let's say I've been caught drink driving, and I need to go to a lawyer. It's important for me as the person defending myself, in a court of law, to make sure I research that lawyer I'm going to well. Number one, is he or she an expert in drink driving cases? Number two, what has been their track record? Mm-hmm. Are they maintaining their license? Is there any adverse feedback about them in this age and time? And the problem is that as a lot of these migrants are so desperate to go overseas, they will go to the first guy available, and more than likely in their own city, back in their home countries, not in New Zealand. And that is the problem, because those guys sitting there and dishing out advice about New Zealand or Canada or Australia have never set foot themselves in any of these countries. And that is the problem. So my advice to migrants would be, choose, if you're wanting to go to Sweden for whatever reason, try and find somebody who specializes in Sweden. Try and find somebody ideally who lives in Sweden. In this age and time, distance is not a problem, especially post-COVID. We are all interacting online, sending documents and transacting business. Because a lot of migrants do not realize that the real drama starts after they land in the destination country. And that is where they really need the advisor. And that is where a lot of them goof up. I get hundreds of calls here on a weekly basis here in New Zealand where they say, "Hey, look, I'm here and there's nobody to support me. Can you do something for me?" And I'd say, who's the company that sent you here? And they'd say, no, ABC, XYZ, whoever. And I said, don't they have a branch in New Zealand? They say, no. So what? Yeah. Now you see the problem?
Yeah.
You see the problem?
Yeah.
It's like somebody sold you a car, but there's no workshop to get that car serviced in your city.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, in terms of being an entrepreneur, what are some of the biggest things people need to be aware of when wanting to be an entrepreneur, or biggest mistakes, I suppose, people make?
The three things I think that are very important for any entrepreneur is persistence, patience, and courage. I'd call these three probably from my own experience, because I'm a first-generation entrepreneur in my family. Nobody before me ever got into business in my family. Everybody was happy doing their jobs, working for somebody else. So I was the first guy to step out and do it. I probably lagged a little bit in the sort of mentoring that can occur if you're born into a business family, because from a very young age you begin to absorb them consciously or subconsciously, and you're like, I think my kids hear me all the time on the phone discussing various things, or when I pick them up from school and I'm driving them back home, I'm on on the speakerphone speaking to somebody or the other. And so I think I like from a mentoring, and I had to learn it myself along the way. But more than anything else, I think I am where I am. It's been almost 20 years I've been in business now. It's been a fantastic journey for me, and I just feel so fulfilled as an individual and as an entrepreneur. And the greatest joy is in creating employment for other people and providing that leadership to them and providing that vision to the other people in your team. My team is about 52 people, by the way. All across the world. So we are based here, and we are a very proudly New Zealand owned and operated company. I'm a Kiwi, by the way. I've been here long enough to
Good man.
to get my black passport and whip it out rather proudly at the different border crossings. So 52 of us working in different parts of the world: Malaysia, India, Canada, US, so we are pretty much all over the place. But for COVID, we probably would have been 200 people across all around the world. COVID taught me courage is very important, not to back off, to stare that challenge in the eye and stand your ground. So yeah, I'd say patience, persistence, courage, a positive attitude towards life, knowing that every down will have an up. Or to quote that beautiful lyrics from Dire Straits, there will be sunshine after rain. There will be laughter after pain.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, particularly young people, have a fear of failure.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yes, I completely agree with that.
So how do you kind of rewire their brain to have more courage, to be fearless, I suppose, when it comes to business? I mean, COVID has shown us that anything can change.
The most unexpected thing can happen here.
Yeah.
How do youngsters learn to face adversity and still keep going forward with courage? I'd say look out for mentors. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily always to be a physical person you're interacting with. There are so many good examples of people who have moved ahead in the face of adversity. So many people. Some of my heroes, for instance, are people I never met, but they are inside my head all the time, talking to me. Either I watched a movie about the person, or I read a book about the person, or watched a doco on the person on YouTube, or what have you. For instance, my personal hero is Ray Krok. Would you know who Ray Krok is?
The name rings a bell.
The name rings a bell, Krok with a K. And I'm 52, so was he. When, at 52, he was just your typical average sales guy.
Right.
Okay, and at 52. But then he stumbled upon a chance, and he went for it. He absolutely went for it. And that's the reason we have McDonald's today.
That's who it is.
That's who it is.
Yes, I was thinking the name rings a bell, but why is it eluding me?
Yes, that great movie called The Founder, which was brilliant. See, I never met Ray Krok in my life. But when I saw that movie, it inspired me in an entirely different way. Because, as I was getting older, I was coming up to 50. I thought, man, you're getting old. Would you have the energy? No, seriously. The thoughts to cross, Maybe you should do another podcast on the challenges faced by middle-aged men. It's a whole new story altogether.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. So I was like, where do I draw inspiration from? So I was similar to the young person who was losing confidence, or, I was also a middle-aged guy on the verge of losing my confidence. And then I stumbled upon this movie called The Founder, and I watched it, and it absolutely rejuvenated me.
Oh, I loved that film.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's where I derived that courage, that ability. If Ray Kroc could do it at 52 with little or no background and create something that's so gigantic and enormous around the world, it apparently feeds 20% of the population on a daily basis around the world. There's your inspiration right there.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I really respect about yourself is you always seem happy. You always seem like you're in a good mood. I mean, I imagine with everything that happened with COVID, you would have had to pivot quite a bit and switch tact. Was that difficult for yourself?
Oh, extremely. There were some very, very dark days.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Adversity is going to hit you in the face.
Yeah.
Every once in a while. If it's not COVID, it might be a health issue. It might be something else or the other. So I think what we need to understand is that life is always going to be a series of challenges with those phases of happiness in between those two milestones. It is knowing that there's going to be another one that's going to come up in the next kilometer or so, and enjoying the ride in between those two milestones, and yet be prepped for whatever challenge comes your way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you do that though? How do you stay in that right mind frame day to day?
Good question. Again, like I said, I draw inspiration from things and people who I've never met. And one of the most amazing things that inspired me in my personal way of living and my attitude towards life is a picture that is, and I'd like our viewers and our listeners to Google it. It's called the pale blue dot.
The pale blue dot.
Yeah. So I was absolutely astounded, blown away when I saw it for the first time. It looks like, the background here in the studio, and just this little tiny dot somewhere there. It looks like a very grainy, blurred image of nothing really.
Right.
And then there's this little brightish blue dot in the middle of it. And it was actually a picture. It was a real picture of planet Earth taken by the Voyager 2 spacecraft when it was about to leave the solar system. And Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, requested NASA to turn it around one last time before it left the solar system and take a picture of the Earth. So they did it on his request, and that's now become the very famous pale blue dot picture. And it astounded me to realize how small we are in the scheme of things. So every time I'm faced with a challenge, and that's my screen, that's my background screen on my laptop, by the way.
Oh, okay. So you're constantly reminded of it.
I'm constantly looking at that. And whenever I'm faced with a challenge and I see this picture, I don't take the view of Arun Jacob in Hamilton trying to deal with that problem. I call it the Voyager view. I take a Voyager's view. And I look at that pale blue and say, I can't see COVID on that dot.
Yeah.
I can't see a problem with my GST on that dot.
Well, I suppose it's a perspective thing,
yes,
isn't it?
Exactly. That's the word. So I chose that perspective to sort of catch my breath and then come back closer and deal with the problem.
So are you still trying to help people migrate to various countries even though we're going through COVID?
Yes, there have been a few countries that are beginning to open up. Canada has actively kept its borders open for international students. I think we're taking a bit more of a cautious approach here in New Zealand. But I appreciate, like I said, there's a Kiwi in me and then there's a businessman in me. So I appreciate as a Kiwi, the fact that the government is keeping us safe and stuff like that. But yeah, there are some countries that are open still. And so there is a little bit of movement, not as much as it was before. But there is a lot of pent-up demand. So once vaccinations roll out globally and there is more normalcy in the way people are traveling, there's a lot of pent-up demand.
So how do you balance between the businessman in you and the Kiwi in you? Because obviously those two paths won't necessarily align.
I know. I know. And that's where I think, Reese, it's also important that we prioritize things in our life. We absolutely need to prioritize things in our life. So what's more important to me right now? To see my family being safe and secure and just going on with life on an everyday basis? Or the fact that my growth has stopped because of COVID for 2 years? So I choose to prioritize the happiness of my family over the growth of my company. And so again, it's a question of perspective. So I'm happy. I'm happy to see that we are all in a safe environment. For us, life is, as usual. You invited me to your studio. I'm here. How many other countries can boast of doing something like this, in the environment? So I think it's also being grateful, being thankful of the things that are already there as a blessing, rather than imagined future glory and fortunes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
But I imagine as an entrepreneur, as a businessman,
Yeah.
you're always thinking ahead,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Of the next thing.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you do that currently when we live in an environment where there's so much uncertainty?
Yeah. By tracking closely the different activities that are being done globally to tackle COVID, for instance.
Yeah.
So I am an ardent follower of various news channels and papers, and I have a Google alert, anything to do with vaccinations and migration. So, as you know, you can put those, keywords of alerts and anything that comes in. So I'm constant. I think the only way to battle a situation like this is to keep gaining more and more information. And when you get that information, you feel a bit more comfortable inside your head. So I know, for instance, that we've just started our first round of vaccinations here in New Zealand. Yesterday I was watching BBC before I went to sleep, and there was some discussion around vaccinations rolled out. So that's the only way an entrepreneur can survive at this stage, is to stay hopeful, keep track of the information flow, and know for sure that if I can see this year through and stay afloat, we will bounce back very, very strongly. Because like I said, there's a lot of pent-up demand in the migration industry. It's all going to come rushing out of that pool of demand.
Yeah, well, I imagine once the borders open,
Yes.
you'll see a huge influx of people
Yes.
leaving and coming in,
Yes.
more than likely. And your phone will probably never stop ringing.
Absolutely. It's going to ring off the hook.
Have you prepared for that?
Yes, we are. And that's the reason. You said, how are you prepared as an entrepreneur? That was a good question. And that's the reason we haven't dropped anybody from our team. It was the easiest decision for me as an entrepreneur to say, wow, my revenues have dropped down to less than 10th of what they were before, and quickly start dropping your team members and stuff like that. But you take years to build this fantastic team. I have 9 licensed immigration advisors on my team. And I've paid for their course, I've paid for their licenses, I've paid for, their supervision and everything else. So you don't have a knee-jerk reaction to a challenge and immediately start dropping those people, saying, oh, this is, a weight on the company, you need to dig inside and find those resources to hold on to that wonderful team that you've built.
Well, some people do, though. They
Yes.
think purely of the numbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's, I think, the difference between an entrepreneur and a visionary. And yes, that is, in business, for instance, normally people, one of the most commonly used terms is, what's your mission statement and what's your vision statement? Okay, there's a vision statement and a mission statement for every company. The mission statement is what you see today, on the table. And so it is very easy to see this big team of people and start chopping and snipping and dropping them off. But the vision is what you cannot see. It's beyond the horizon. So a true entrepreneur can look beyond the curve of the earth and know there is a ship which is traveling towards you, and it's going to arrive over that curve.
That's a skill that I think a lot of people need to acquire.
Exactly.
But they don't.
Exactly. Yeah. Foresight, and which is what I said, foresight, patience and persistence and optimism. What goes up has to come down. What goes down has to go up.
Yeah.
You need to hardwire that into your brain.
Well, you can't be on top forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. And in terms of people that migrate here, because we've discussed this off here before, in terms of people that migrate here, but they find it difficult to adapt to the culture. And not just here in the UK, America. What do you say to those people?
I'd say get out. Stop living in your little ghettos that you create inside your minds. I mean, for Christ's sake, there was a reason you left India and came to New Zealand or UK or Australia or what have you. And that was not to, go back and realign with your own community. Sure, there is a factor of comfort there.
A safety net.
Yes, there is. But you came to New Zealand to be as much a New Zealander as, retaining your Indianness or Chineseness or what have you. So I think a lot of people do not integrate with the societies they get into because of maybe, I don't know, fear factor, discomfort factor, not sure if they'll be accepted. But you wouldn't know till you try.
Loss of identity maybe as well.
Yeah. You wouldn't know till you try. I've happily gone around, and I'm accepted. I even speak Maori for that matter. I was the only Indian bloke at the Wananga when I was doing. I did 2 courses in Maori, which was I did a level 2 in Terea Maori, and I've done a level 3 in Tikanga Maori. Okay, I was the only Indian bloke. So yeah, I mean, initially even I felt that apprehension of, how is it going to be as the only non-Maori, non-Pakeha guy in the class? But then I was just accepted. And in doing that, my vision, my understanding of New Zealand is so much more than the average migrant. Because New Zealand is we have, like I said at the start of our conversation, such a beautiful bicultural platform. We have the Pakeha and the Maori bicultural platform, and now there is a third element of a bit of migration happening as well. I am one of those few fortunate migrants who has a fantastic understanding of both the Maori and the Pakeha side of things. I've attended tangis. I've done my no homarais. I've slept there. I know the exact way to do a hongi. I know how to greet and start a conversation and stuff like that. And in that, I found a lot more acceptance into New Zealand at large.
Was it easy for you though when you first came here? Or was it something that took you a while to kind of adjust to?
No, I think, again, Reese, I may not be the typical example of an average migrant because a lot of them, and I think the main reason I say that is because of the English language skill I acquired at a very, very young age.
Well, you're very well spoken.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this is something that's been with me since my childhood, growing up back in India. So I have been very adaptable to the English-speaking environment. And I think for me that was a huge asset individually, that I could easily break those walls down and move on. And I think a lot of it boils down to English, where people are a little apprehensive about moving out into the larger society. So for me, it wasn't such a big challenge, to be honest. And also, I think the other thing that will help a lot is to, again, do a bit of research about the destination you're going to. So when I came into New Zealand, the first couple of months was learning as much as I could about New Zealand so that I could have an average everyday conversation. I didn't know what the heck rugby was before I came to New Zealand.
I'm sure a lot of people didn't.
Exactly. I didn't know what fishing was.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
Yeah, and small things like that. I have this great friend of mine called Paul, who is also from Hamilton, and my former neighbor. And he and I, initially struggled to find that friendship, although we were, friends across the fence. But I'd go to his parties, and I was, again, the only non-Kiwi bloke there in that whole group of 30, 40 people. So I did struggle initially. I did feel like I asked myself, do I belong here? But I persisted, hung in there, created those conversations. And over a period of time, I just broke down those walls. And today I'm probably the first guy at Paul's party.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's the way it is. And Paul and I and another friend called John, we actually did a month-long road trip in India about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a valid point you make because, say, with India, for example, it's a very different culture to, say, here.
Correct.
So it can be very hard adjusting, particularly if you don't, even if you can speak English, but you don't really have similar interests.
Exactly. I mean, something as simple as being able to eat with a fork and a knife.
Yeah, well, you guys eat with your hands.
It's not, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not something that's part of our culture. So there are all those invisible, let's say there was a very genuine, honest invitation from your neighbor or colleague saying, hey, look, how about meeting for dinner at this lovely Italian restaurant tonight? I didn't know how to eat pasta.
And there'd be quite a few Italian restaurants in India, though,
Well, now, yes. Now with the whole globalization. And,
right.
Those,
but back
when
then,
I was growing up.
Right, it wasn't, yeah.
I was growing up, The first time I ate a burger was when some of my cousins who came from the U.S., and we were still living back in India, and they were like, "Oh, we're dying for a burger." I didn't know what a burger meant. So it takes a while to assimilate. But the problem is when you're taking the time to assimilate, because you have those inbuilt apprehensions of not being part of the culture, you tend to hold back sometimes a little bit. But that is where it becomes counterproductive. I'd say go ahead and make those mistakes. It's okay. Nobody's going to castigate you. Nobody's going to nail you to a cross and kill you.
Yeah, well, it's true.
Be bold. Like first podcast in New Zealand for me. Never done this in my life before.
Oh,
I didn't shy away from it.
Yeah, well, you're doing really well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't shy away from it.
Yeah.
So here I am, sitting and doing my first experience on a podcast with a popular podcaster like yourself. And there it is. I've learned it. So second one will get easier and easier and easier.
Of course.
So I had to break that invisible wall inside my own head. Unfortunately, a lot of migrants don't do that.
Yeah. Well, say with India, for example, I know from going there, the type of food that you eat is very different from here.
Different, yeah.
And I find there, so if you go to a restaurant, you've got about 30 options just for the entree, where here it's a bit more consolidated, right? So Indians might come here and they find that the menus don't have anything to offer them, particularly if they're a vegetarian or a vegan, because let's face it, Kiwis are very meat-oriented.
Meat eaters,
yeah,
yes.
very, very meat
Yes.
Oriented. So what about Indians who find that difficult to accept? Because they don't want to go to restaurants because they feel like there's nothing that I can eat. I mean, I think that restaurants can be good because it's a good way of socializing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I'd say it was a choice you made. You chose to go to a country.
Touche.
Okay?
Yep.
That's my view on it.
Yeah.
So don't land in New Zealand and then start complaining about the existing culture. Saying there isn't enough vegetarian restaurants here. There isn't, enough whatever, kind of thing. You chose to be here.
Yeah, it's very valid. I mean, it's brutally truthful, but it's valid.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So I'd say learn to adapt and learn to get inventive. And if you realize that, there are more people like myself who would eat only vegetarian food, go ahead and start a vegetarian restaurant.
Yeah. We need more of them.
Exactly. And that's how you become an even more productive migrant to New Zealand.
Do you get asked this, by the way, when people migrate?
Which is about the vegetarian part of it?
Yeah, or food, like...
They ask, do we get Indian food and stuff? And I actually smile and say, we probably get more than you do. Because interestingly, it's a fact, because the Indian stores here actually stock much higher quality produce and products. Because there is a strict border control and anything of substandard will not be allowed into our country. And there are strict government rules around not having out-of-date products on your shelves and all those kinds of things. Plus, an Indian store will not just be Indian. It would have Pakistani rice. It would have Bangladeshi something. It would have Sri Lankan pickles. It will have whatever else, which is just not possible back in India, for instance. So an Indian store here would actually have a much wider, much better, higher quality offering than back in India.
I never even thought of that. Do people, when they speak to you, they're like, oh, wow, okay, that's amazing.
And what I do is I'm, like yourself, I'm a small broadcaster myself. So we run a couple of very good YouTube channels and some Facebook pages for the company. My own individual YouTube channel has got, I think, about 22,000 followers at the moment.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
well done. Well done.
Yeah. So, and what I do is, wherever I'm going, I take little snippets of whatever I'm doing and take a picture and say, hey, look, sometimes you guys ask me if I can find, for instance, a puja item, puja being the prayer they do, back in India. And they say, can I get that particular, there's a little bell that tinkle and stuff like that. Take a picture and say, hey, look, if you ever wonder, can I get everything that I want? Here, look, even this is available. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arun. So if anybody wants to follow AJV or your personal profiles, what's the best way of them doing that?
www.ajvglobal.com is the website.
Yep.
Or just Google it and you should hit our Facebook or YouTube or one of those places. Yeah.
Because is AJV, does it have a YouTube channel or is it just your personal YouTube channel?
No, we also have a company YouTube channel.
Okay,
And
so there's
one
both.
in my name as well.
So if someone is obsessed with you, they can check
They
out
can come
both.
in, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, hey, thank you so much for doing this. I very much appreciate it. You're a great man, someone I greatly admire. And I hope that everyone who's listening to this, even if you're not migrating here, I'm sure you can get something out of this because he's a great individual.
Oh, thank you, Reese. You know what? It's always a pleasure to share the experiences of your life with other people and hopefully provide some sort of pathway to them to just stand up and do your thing and be happy doing it. And you like yourself, look at this beautiful studio you created here and great inspiration to other people who want to follow in footsteps. And so some of us need to be leaders and not just be followers all the time. So well done you as well. Proud of your achievements as well.
Thank you.
All right.
That's a good good way to wrap up. So make sure you share, like, and subscribe. Follow AJV, follow Arun. And until next time, stay safe.
Thank you.